I recognize the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just before I begin, could I'm not sure what the procedure is to do this, but I'm finding it very warm, and I'm wondering, with the blessing of the House, if I might remove my coat while I give remarks.
So what we're going to do here is I'm going to get the fans pointed down at you. And I think that should help you quite a bit. I know that we're all hot here. I've got on 3 layers. And so I feel it. And I'm up higher, which means it's hotter, so I get it. So we're gonna get those fans on you so you can give a brilliant statement for an hour. Maybe, hopefully, kinda. I don't know. I recognize the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to take some time to explore reasons we have on this side of the House to question this legislation, spend some time exploring reasons we have to support this legislation, and finally, some time exploring why this legislation, on balance, and maybe a positive step, but doesn't go far enough to address the issue it concerns. So with that as my frame, I'll begin. One of the reasons we have to question this bill, other colleagues have already flagged the lack of consultation with the College of Social Workers, and I won't retread that ground. It seems common sense to me that if there is a group of stakeholders, of highly qualified professionals delivering a service that is an essential public good, it's important that they are adequately regulated. There's a piece of legislation that sort of gives that a frame, that rather than do things to them to modernize their profession, out of respect for them as professionals, it makes a lot of sense to do things with them. And that clearly hasn't happened in this case. The Minister of Health a little earlier talked about regulated health professions. Drawing on her firsthand experience as a nurse, as a licensed nurse, and I take to heart much of her remarks. I appreciate her perspective. But I want to take us down memory lane for a minute about the risks of what happens when a government decides to take action to change the scope of practice of a group of highly trained, highly impactful professionals without consulting them, especially when that legislation and when that policy is designed by people who don't actually do the work and have a lived experience of a particular scope of practice. Back in 2018, under the, I'll choose my words carefully so I'm not called unparliamentary, under the autocratic regime of Stephen McNeil, not long after school principals were deprofessionalized, redefined in law as management, and legally extracted from the Nova Scotia Teachers Union and set in a professional association whose objects did not include the right to collectively bargain, the right to publicly advocate for the needs of its members. The McNeil government came once again for a different group of NSTU members. The McNeil government said, hey, it makes no sense to us why school-based social workers and school psychologists and speech-language pathologists who are clearly not teachers are certified as teachers. Does it make sense to us why they're in the teachers' union? So we're not going to follow the law and certify these professionals under the parameters that have existed for a long time. We're going to stop granting licenses to these folks, and we are instead going to hire them as professionals under a non-unionized healthcare scope of practice. And this is going to liberate them to unlock all kinds of impact that they can have that they can't currently have because they're prisoners of the school system. And it sounded great to lots of people. No, that makes sense. McNeil, show those teachers a thing or two. And then we discovered that these folks are unique. School psychologists are not the same as psychologists in public practice or private practice. They have a fundamentally different scope of practice. They undergo a unique set of training, and once they graduate, their scope of practice is unique to the public school system. And if you take the school out of school psychologist, you actually change the way that they do their work. And you actually blunt the impact, the transformative, life-changing impact they have in public schools every day. You don't augment their capability, you handcuff or amputate their capability. School-based social workers have a unique scope of practice. They are not everyday social workers that do social work like everybody else. They practice in a particular context. They work in a way that is unique to other social workers. Speech-language pathologists in the school system have a unique scope of practice outside of the way that speech-language pathologists in private practice or in a healthcare setting perform their duties. Why am I telling this story? Because a government that thought they knew better than professionals who understood their role in a way nobody else did imposed changes on them. And those changes limited and harmed their ability to support people. And it was a long fight, Speaker. For over a year and a half, we fought in the courts to make sure that the rights of speech-language psychologists, or speech-language pathologists, school psychologists, and school-based social workers retain their status as certified teachers under the law in Nova Scotia, that they retain their representation under the Nova Scotia Teachers Union under the law. And Speaker, through the legal process, that's a fight that we won. And we successfully protected the scope of practice of these professionals from degradation by a short-sighted change in the way that these people practice and did their work. Now, I'll take the minister at face value. The minister says there's no intent to demonstrably alter the way that these social workers show up for Nova Scotians or do their work. I'll take that at face value. It's on the record, it's unanswered. We'll just leave it there. If that's the case, then there is no harm in talking to these professionals about the way that this law may unintentionally alter the parameters of their work, and whether those unintentional alterations are good for the practice of social work in this province. And Speaker, that's a question that matters not only for the workers that do the work, it matters for the people that those workers work with and beside every day. And that matters because those folks are the most vulnerable of us all, that live on the brink of the ultimate breakup of family. Youth in particular live on the razor's edge of not growing up in the setting that's best for them and having to grow up in a second best setting. And that second best setting, despite its best intentions, despite the professionalism of the staff that work in it, despite the best of intentions, despite all of the good hearts that do that work, those systems fail those kids structurally and systemically, decade after decade after decade. Changing the way that these folks work through perhaps improperly or partially considered legislation can create a lasting impact that further compounds the gaps and the harms that youth and families in dealing with the care system experience. And that's a price that Nova Scotians can't afford to pay. These families and these youth, most of all, cannot be expected to pay the cost of short-sighted legislative change. That's not to say that this entire bill is without merit. My colleagues have done a wonderful job of highlighting the aspects of this legislation which are commendable. Credit has been given. But this one in particular, you know, we all know the cliche, history is doomed, you know, those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. Let's learn from the recent past here in Nova Scotia. 2018 is not ancient history. I want to sit for a minute about the lasting aftermath of the impact, even for the year and a half, whereby policy, speech language pathologists, school psychologists, and school-based social workers were forced out of their scope of practice by policy, even though, yes, a court case set them right and technically made them whole. There have been lasting negative impacts on that population. Recruitment and retention of those folks. The fracturing of their work life. The government made a whole lot of ballyhoo about the fact that having 12-month school psychologists and 12-month employed school-based social workers and 12-month employed speech language psychologists or speech language pathologists was going to revolutionize the services that families receive. The fact is, it hasn't. Not remotely close. The disruption to the scope of practice of these folks created major issues in collective bargaining and pension for these folks. And those issues, Speaker, continue to make working in the private sector, these folks that I'm talking about, speech language pathologists, school psychologists, school-based social workers, are highly trained and highly in demand. They can go anywhere they want in Canada or abroad and get a job like that. They have options. And because of the way that this disrupted their work lives, many, many folks that are qualified to do this work in Nova Scotia have chosen other places. The unintended consequence of it is a disruption to staffing in this area of need in our school system. And boy, howdy, do we need them. There may not be an intent to harm the profession. There may not be an intent to disrupt the way that these folks do this work. There may not be an intent to offend a profession. That doesn't mean that those things won't happen. If we don't take the time and the diligence to sit with whether or not this is the right way to achieve this change. The cost could be major. This is already a profession where attrition and turnover and burnout are high. Other colleagues have eloquently captured the dynamic of this work. Folks who devote themselves to people that exist in the deepest, most profound emotional crises that any human being can encounter. That is the landscape of their work every day. Not many of us have the gumption to spend a lifetime in that work. And the few that do it are heroes who don't wear capes, but man, do they make a difference. As this House, it's incumbent upon us to sit with whether these changes may serve to destabilize a profession that's essential to the well-being of our province as a whole. Whether we intend harm or not, the actions that we take in this House, the decisions that we make, the language that we put on paper that structures the way people show up and do their work and are held to account, and their ability to advocate for change on behalf of the most vulnerable Nova Scotians. Nova Scotians who have no association, who have no union, who have no representation. Nova Scotians who are the farthest away from that kind of privilege. It matters that we weigh whether or not annihilating that kind of capacity by this profession is in the best interests of the province. And by taking pause, it doesn't mean that we can't change the way that they are regulated. Colleagues have already highlighted, could there be a net benefit to transferring the regulatory framework for this profession under the Regulated Health Professionals Act? Yeah, there's potential that it could work. But right now that path is not clear. The potholes are not obvious. The speed bumps are unknown. And these are often things. The problem with legislation, Speaker, is once you pass it, it ain't easy to fix, and you got to respect what's on the page. It's worth it to take the time to get it right on the first crack so you don't make a mess that you don't intend that's very difficult to fix after the fact. And so when we look at this bill, that's one of the reasons, this is a reason I want to highlight. We can learn from the past experience, the mistakes of a former government. It was short-sighted, it was mean-spirited, and it was not in the best interest of Nova Scotians for Stephen McNeil to do what he did to school-based specialists. But he did it anyway because he could.
Order, you can't use personal names. Or reprieve. You can't. My apologies. I recognize the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you. It was wrong to do it. And aside from the fact that it was wrong, it harmed the province. It harmed people who do important work. It harmed the students that rely on them, who are most vulnerable in schools. And it harmed the families that rely on the services that they provide. Speaker, we have an opportunity here to avoid that kind of short-sighted, mean-spirited harm, intended or unintended. I know this much about change as a leader. You may not mean for things to happen because of what you do. But when things happen because of what you do, you're responsible for that impact, whether you intended it or not. It's a great opportunity for us here in this House to sit with that question. I want to talk for a minute about reasons that we have to support this legislation. Sorry, I'm just making sure I got the right screen up here. There's a report by the Child Welfare League of Canada published in 2021 about supporting equitable transitions to adulthood for youth in care in Canada. The report highlights that Canada is one of only a handful of countries in the global north with no nationally legislated entitlements for youth exiting care. While in many other countries, national legislation exists in which entitlements, including the option to stay in placement, are framed as rights without any exclusions or admissions processes. Youth who grow up in out-of-home care in Canada are subject to considerable inequities, placing them at disproportionate level of risk. Comparative research reveals that a significant number of countries have made provisions for placements in the child welfare system to be extended until age 21 and beyond, and it reflects evidence that staying in care longer is associated with better outcomes, including reduced homelessness, increased educational attainment, and improved odds of employment and greater future earnings. Cost-benefit analyses have been undertaken that indicate that the cost of not safeguarding aftercare and extended care benefits result in far greater costs to society in the long term, because with these provisions, youth leaving care are less likely to rely on social assistance as adults and more likely to become successful taxpayers. We believe that this legislation's action to extend the opportunity to youth to continue to receive supports through the age of 25. The one thing that I potentially would debate whether or not a hard stop at 25 is what's right or what's best for youth in care. Lots of research says putting a number on the official exit from care is unfair. Some youth are ready to exit. They're prepared before the age of, say, 25. And some youth need support for somewhat longer than the age of 25. And there are plenty of compelling reasons for that. So we commend the government for adopting legislation that recognizes the need. We've heard comments previously, the past practice of when youth in care arrive at the age of 18 and they are handed their belongings in a very inhumane way and said, good luck, away you go. We recognize this legislation is a step forward, and that's a really positive thing. This report outlines a number of proposed or recommended national standards for care for youth that otherwise would have aged out of care. And I'll read from the report. I don't have a printed copy, Speaker. I recognize I have an obligation to table this document, and you have my commitment that I'll have it printed and ready to submit during orders of the day tomorrow, but I don't have it at the moment. The National Council of Youth in Care Advocates, made up of people with lived experience and allies from across the country, have researched, developed, and validated equitable standards for transitions to adulthood for youth in care. The first of their kind, these equitable standards provide a solid foundation for government action. The equitable standards are presented across 8 transition pillars, defining the areas in which youth in care need support to ensure a successful transition to adulthood, with key supports provided as actionable items to ensure jurisdictions, organizations, and caring community members are meeting outlined standards. And those standards, there are 8 of them. The first standard is financial. Every young person should have the financial resources required to meet their needs. Youth in care deserve to have a financial starting point that is above the poverty line and allows them to pursue their careers, interests, and dreams. Speaker, we recognize in this legislation that it satisfies or meets this standard, and that's a good thing. The second standard is education and professional development. Every young person should experience an environment where they can learn and grow in ways that are meaningful to them and at their own pace. We recognize in this legislation the potential for youth who previously would have aged out of care to receive supports from various branches of government, to receive education that is meaningful to them on a timeline that's doable for them. Speaker, I once had the privilege to work in a program called Bridges for Learning. It was a pilot program launched by Homebridge Youth Society just across the harbor at the Ray Allen Center. And the program aimed to tackle a very serious problem in public schools in Nova Scotia for youth in care. That often youth in care, while they're outside of their family homes, are often transferred to facilities all around the province. And in those transfers, spending months and sometimes years outside of their home communities, they lose touch with the community school that they are registered in their home community. And this often results in loss of learning for students of multiple grade level equivalents over the course of their, what should be their school years. But sadly, a lot of times these students lose years of their education because they're being moved throughout the care system. And that turns into young adults who oftentimes don't graduate from high school, or if they do graduate from high school, have significant gaps in their learning, and that becomes an obstacle to their pursuit of post-secondary education. And we know that one key pathway to good paying, fulfilling work is through meaningful post-secondary education. And for these students, they oftentimes don't qualify academically. And so the ability for these students to access post-secondary education on a timeline that's meaningful to them doesn't mean that they've got to go to university for 4 consecutive years on a September to April timetable. This legislation provides enabling support for government departments to ensure that if a particular individual having reached the age of adulthood, it makes sense for them to take 1 or 2 post-secondary credits per term over a period of 6 to 7 years. That's what they can academically handle. The doorway would be open to that kind of arrangement, and we believe that's a good thing, Speaker. The third equitable standard is housing. Every young person should have a place they can call home without strict rules and conditions to abide by. We believe this legislation enables multiple government departments or branches to evaluate the needs of youth in care and to be supported with housing past the age where they normally would have been turned out on their own. And that's a good thing. Relationships. Every young person should have people in their life that they can count on unconditionally and interdependently. Youth in care need to feel that they belong, have worth, and are valuable members of their communities. We believe that by continuing to support these youth through their early adulthood, that the relationships they have with caring social workers, other support staff, therapists that they may cultivate relationships with, that these people, rather than being cut off from relationship because funding and resources end because of an arbitrary birthday, that youth will continue to have access to these relationships that will sustain their growth and development and greater well-being through their young adulthood. The fifth standard is culture and spirituality. Every young person should be connected to their culture and spirituality in ways that are meaningful to them, safe, and at their own pace. The sixth standard is health and well-being. Every young person should be provided with timely, ongoing services and benefits that support their lifelong health and well-being. These supports need to be offered within a trauma-informed, non-judgmental, harm reduction approach without significant wait times. We are pleased on this side of the aisle to see that multiple departments are participating in this legislation. It demonstrates that government, at least in a nominal way, recognizes that supporting these youth is an intersectional proposition that requires resources from multiple government departments. This law puts a demand on, thank you, Speaker, puts a demand on multiple government departments to collaborate to ensure that youth are getting the supports that they need from health and wellness, from mental health and addictions, from lots of other places as well. Advocacy and rights is the seventh pillar. Every young person should have their rights respected and should experience environments where their voices are heard and their silence is addressed holistically. I want to come back to this one in a minute when we talk about why this legislation is not enough. And the last pillar is emerging adulthood development. Every young person should experience environments that cultivate personal growth and development as they transition into adulthood. I want to turn for a minute to a different document. This one is entitled "Nothing to Celebrate the Crisis of Youth Aging Out of Care." This is a 2025 Senate of Canada report, and among its contents and witnesses are the formidable Dr. Jacqueline Gahagan, faculty at Mount St. Vincent University. Dr. Gahagan, her life story is truly remarkable. As a youth in care, has become arguably a leading light and advocate for youth in care as an academic, and her formidable research that focuses on outcomes for youth in care informs legislation, policy, and reform of care systems, not only in Nova Scotia, in Canada, but also internationally. Again, I don't have a printed copy ready for this time, but I will table this document tomorrow as part of orders of the day. The report looks at provincial and territorial approaches to post-majority support. The very youth that we're talking about here, youth that are 18 through their early adulthood. It says across Canada, the age limit for child protection services varies between provinces and territories, as does the availability of transitional services once young people age out of these systems. The committee heard about several provincial programs to provide transitional services, including British Columbia's Strengthening Abilities and Journeys of Empowerment program, known as SAGE, S-A-G-J-E for short, Manitoba's agreements with young adults and supports for young adults grant, Ontario's Ready, Set, Go program, and Nova Scotia's PATH program. Stacey Greeno, Director, Child and Family Wellbeing, Nova Scotia Department of Community Services, explained that the objective of PATH is to build a support system for youth to ensure that they are safe, healthy, have positive connections to their communities, and have equitable opportunities to access the supports needed to thrive and reach their fullest potential as they journey into adulthood, including 24-hour on-call access to a community-based social worker. The committee heard from participants in the PATH and SAGE programs who highlighted the benefits of reliable supports at critical points in the lives of vulnerable young people. Speaker, I want to highlight that the words I'm about to read are the voice of Nova Scotian youth who have lived in care of the minister here in Nova Scotia and whose lived experience in the window of time that we're talking about, 18 through mid-adulthood, or early adulthood, should give us inspiration to think about this legislation and whether it's on point and whether it's enough. Amber Moon, Youth Advisory Council Committee, or Youth Advisory Committee member, Vancouver Aboriginal Child and Family Services Society, described receiving SAGE funding for rent, food, clothes, and by request, occasional extra funding to help with textbooks while enrolled at a university. Noting a long break from post-secondary education due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the loss of a parent, Amber Moon explained that many youth face delays in their education due to personal barriers or systemic inequalities, and recommended that if former youth in care are in school, they should get financial support for their entire degree. The clock should not run out on them while they're pursuing post-secondary training. Similarly, Kiuna Mulison explained that before the PATH program came into effect, the limited funding provided to her was not enough to cover basic needs, and she developed an eating disorder stemming from the stress of budgeting for food. She stated, "PATH funding has been life-changing for me. It has alleviated some of the financial stress of trying to stretch a limited budget to cover everything from groceries to school supplies. The consistency of this funding has allowed me to focus more on my education and personal growth rather than constantly struggling to meet my basic needs. I feel a sense of financial stability, which has made an incredible difference in my overall well-being." However, she also noted that she would soon lose access to mental health care, and that coverage through her university would not allow for her to continue with the private therapist with whom she has developed a relationship of trust. Linnell Murphy similarly recounted the ways that PATH, the Nova Scotia program, again speaker, has allowed him to accomplish goals and learn about resilience, responsibility, and overcoming obstacles. He explained that PATH has helped him to afford groceries, dental appointments, and a cell phone bill, as well as enabling him to complete a driver's education and take a take-home inspection course at Dalhousie University. He also credited a youth outreach worker with helping him obtain employment. While PATH and SAGE were the most comprehensive provincial programs that the committee heard about, witnesses described other positive practices. I'm going to skip ahead to another section of the report. The Senate committee was asked to imagine a world where every young person, regardless of their walk in life, steps into adulthood with confidence, stability, and hope. A world where youth aging out of care are not merely surviving but thriving. Witnesses called for a society where youth in care are valued, loved, nurtured, and invested in, and where they are interdependently supported throughout their entire lives, from childhood to adulthood. As explained by Irwin Ellman, former Ontario advocate for children and youth, Canadian child protection systems have, since their inception, been based on risk and liability, with surveillance as their primary tool. Such systems cannot possibly raise a child. Professor Cahagan asked the federal government to fix the system, and through that process actually lift up these individuals who, by no choice of their own, find themselves with the state as their parent. The committee had heard examples of provinces and territories such as Nova Scotia, British Columbia, and Yukon that have reformed their systems of care. Even the nomenclature is reflective of this change, moving away from child protection and favoring the concept of well-being. Speaker, this legislation gives us hope that the three departments co-sponsoring or co-involved in this legislation have turned their mind to these needs and this kind of approach. And we lend our support to that shift. That's a good thing for Nova Scotia. It's a great thing for kids in care. It's a great thing for families. And it's a great thing for our province. So on that piece, we can say that we see a lot of value in the language present in the legislation. I want to take my final few minutes to look at the question of why this legislation isn't enough to address the issue it intends to address. I want to turn for a minute to another critical issue impacting youth in Nova Scotia. The Auditor General's seminal report on school violence documents an epidemic of violence in Nova Scotia schools from one tip of this province to the other. Its recommendations call for a comprehensive slate of actions to address the epidemic of school violence. Now, Speaker, I recognize that the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development has, at least on paper, recognized those recommendations and have agreed, I think, to all but one. And we understand that the department has actioned some of these recommendations already. And some of these actions, and these are actions that are essential. They're good steps to take. I highlight the new student code of conduct, which an update was one of those recommendations in the Auditor General's report. It's an important policy step. But last year I stood in this House in late debate and framed for this government that while the code of conduct is a worthy and a necessary step to address the epidemic of school violence, the risk of this is that we arrive at a policy and then we feel like we've solved the problem. Because we have a policy, we have a solution, and because we have a policy and a solution, the problem will be resolved. The problem with that tendency, Madam Speaker, and that's a tendency of governments of every stripe. It's not necessarily a rock that I'm throwing at this particular government, proverbially. It's true that governments of every stripe tend to look at policy as the solution to complex problems. And the problem with that is that governments of every stripe stop short of what's necessary to actually solve the complex problem. They stop at policy and miss the other key steps that come behind. And I want to come back to some further language in the Senate report to talk about what's necessary. Speaker, for the positive step that this takes to ensure that youth that formerly would have aged out of care will continue to have access to care across a number of government departments, this legislation does not turn its mind to how we stop youth from being in care in the first place. The Senate report reads, while the committee focused this study on issues relating to youth aging out of care, several witnesses spoke about the importance of considering the full spectrum of child well-being, including working to prevent the need for intervention. Jennifer Charlesworth, Representative for Children and Youth, Office of the Representative for Children and Youth of British Columbia, stressed the need to do things differently, considering that Canada's current systems consistently and pervasively lead to poor outcomes. She believes that modifying some policies or adding some money here or a program there is too little, too late. Both witnesses from the British Columbia Office of the Representative for Children and Youth argued that Canada needs to reimagine its models to support the well-being of children and youth in the context of their families, culture, and communities. Derek Montour also spoke about First Nations approaches in which communities and families work together to prevent youth protection-related issues by focusing on solutions centered on the family rather than the individual. He stressed that it's necessary to remain flexible throughout the youth protection intervention process to allow parents to mobilize and be stakeholders in solutions to resolve the issues they face, which is not the case with the Youth Protection Act. The Youth Protection Act places strict deadlines that may prove unrealistic to respond to and respect parents who have experienced multiple traumas and often multi-generational traumas. Representatives from the Montreal Haitian Community Office, Marie-Pierre Ulysse, Board Chair, and Marie-Suzie Cassius, Manager of Option Protection Program, highlighted a similar approach. They work with families newly signaled to the Quebec Director of Youth Protection to help them prevent their children and young people from entering out-of-home care. This includes working with families on parenting skills and demystifying the child protection system. Marie-Pierre Ulysse added that their work thrives on a strength-based models with the parents, where the parents are valorized by the workers who are helping them, solidifying their strengths to be able to raise their children. She referred to this model as community-centric, which is similar to the approach used in Nova Scotia. As explained by Stacey Greeno, the vision that we are seeking to support is that the community supports the safety and well-being of children, youth, and families. That's a shift. You'll hear folks talk about child protection and needing to give up that authority and that power so that the family and the child have the voice at the heart of this, and the community has the support that they need. It also becomes about strengthening the community, considering their culture and how we are bringing that at their very beginning. Overall, witnesses argued that prevention reduces the social costs associated with involvement in the judicial system and youth placements and protection services. It requires that families get better childcare or funding support. Amber Moon told the committee that this lack of support to their family is what led to out-of-home care. While innovation and change are urgently needed, Annette King emphasized the importance of being vigilant about potential unintended consequences, stating, "We have seen some creative initiatives and alternatives and solutions with good intentions and a reconciliation lens. Sometimes they are good. I would love to go into many examples. But I think there is an intention to try to not have kids in care or to try to help kids leave care younger into a family situation or putting them on a youth agreement and creating independence even younger. Sometimes those have unintended consequences that create different problems. So I think whenever decisions are made, we are really recommending a full child rights lens and analysis of the solutions. You don't just want to fix one problem, but create another one." The committee agrees that a child rights lens and the best interests of the child must be paramount as all levels of government find ways to better support families. We've talked about some things that are in this bill. This bill imposes changes on a profession that's essential to the wellness and the outcomes that youth in care deserve. I will go so far as to say that any legislation that makes toxic the relationship between government and the social work profession will have the effect of harming youth in care. You can't disrespect, you can't sidebar, you can't ignore, you can't talk down to, you can't impose on social workers and the professional autonomy that they enjoy as a regulated profession and realize positive outcomes for youth in care. That's an important principle here. The good news is we've got time to fix that. It doesn't have to be that way, and we have in this House the power to consider changes to this legislation which would mitigate that potential. We've taken some time to look at positives that are present in this legislation. Ensuring that youth who formerly would have aged out of care continue to have access to a comprehensive, holistic, intersectional slate of services across a number of government departments is a net positive. It's a big win. It means that kids will not be cut loose before they're ready to stand on their own 2 feet. It means that the province and multiple systems will stand with youth as they find their footing into healthy adulthood. That's a good thing. It's worth noting and commending in this legislation. Lastly, though, I want to remind the House about what's not in this legislation. For all the positives that are present, this legislation only deals with some of the recommendations in the government's most recent review that it says are at the heart or the inspiration of this legislation. We know, based on findings from reports by the Senate of Canada, by expert stakeholders across the country, that simply providing services to kids that otherwise would age out of care doesn't go far enough in supporting youth in care in Nova Scotia. I take lots of people on the government side of the House who've spoken in this budget process at face value. There's lots of criticism about the budget. I don't imagine that surprises members of the government caucus. But I don't think anyone is being remotely disingenuous when they say they recognize the impact that this budget is having on real Nova Scotians in real ways. I know you're human beings, may not agree with all your politics, but I believe you aim to serve your constituents and work to make this province a better place. I trust that much about you. And I know the choices you're making about proposing to make about how the government spends its money, or the money of people, the money that belongs to the people of Nova Scotia. I understand that you're saying you've made tough choices. But I would urge the House, this piece of legislation has much wider impacts than simply changing some language. There's a real opportunity here for Nova Scotia to be a national leader in changing the desperately negative outcomes for youth in care. I believe, Speaker, that this is highly important work. There are few things that we can do in this House. There are few causes that we can apply the power and influence of this legislature and the process that we're all wrapped up in here than this. That the kids and the families who are most at risk, who often suffer the greatest harms, the greatest traumas, and lifelong negative impacts. There are few groups that we can champion the cause of that deserve, that warrant this House's attention to their cause. I believe this bill has some elements worth building around. There are some positive foundations here. That's a good thing. But I urge the government, it's a brave bill to put forward. It's necessary. It's on time. It's the right time to do this right thing for these kids and these families. I stand in agreement in solidarity with you in that much. But I call on you, not as a critic, not as someone who questions your heart, but as someone who shares your passion for a better province for all Nova Scotians. Let us not stop at the limits of this bill. Let's entertain the brave conversation about the changes that we need to make to this system so that we embrace a preventative approach so that 15 years from now, 18 years from now, 20 years from now, when we look back on the passage of this bill, we can put our finger on this moment in time and recognize that the work that we did here changed the channel and transformed the story for these folks. Because nobody needs it more. And it would give me no greater pride to be able to celebrate a change that we helped make together for the benefit of Nova Scotia's most vulnerable, to know that as a province, we took the lead in being more fair and more just, more intentional, more proactive in addressing the needs of these families so that the need for care at a time where youth might otherwise age out, it becomes irrelevant. Because we've done the work of supporting youth and families at a much earlier phase of the process. And those families grow up healthy and strong together because we choose to wrap the supports and resources around them that they need in their moments of crisis and trial to stay together and to build loving bonds that last a lifetime and promote healthy lives and productive lives for kids that grow up in those settings. The momentary experience of trial and hardship and trauma as a family doesn't have to be a life sentence to struggle in this province. If together we find the courage to take what's in front of us and go further with it. So I would encourage the House to think about how we can go a little bit further than we have here. What other steps do we need to take to make sure that we put in place transformative legislation that alters the way that we deliver care to these youth, so that in the not too distant future, the number of youth that need this protection have dramatically been reduced, not because we ignore them or we stop collecting data, but because we know they've grown up healthy and strong because of the changes that we've enabled with this legislation. Speaker, I know some people will take the time that I've spoken as some kind of indication I'm trying to run the clock. I can't say how profoundly, how much this matters. I'm not a youth that grew up in care, but I went to school with lots of them who did. I have been a teacher of youth in care. And these kids and these families deserve our very, very, very best. And this is a moment for all of us on both sides of the aisle to put our collective best foot forward to make sure that we get this legislation right, so that we are part of the help rather than perpetuating the harm that's been so difficult to solve. Speaker, I humbly thank you for the attention that you've given to the members of the House that have listened to my remarks, and I look forward to continued discussion on this bill. Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and some great debate here tonight on Bill 201. Madam Speaker, I move to adjourn debate on Bill 201.
The motion is to adjourn debate on Bill 201. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could you please call government notice of motion?
Government notice of motion. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could you please call Resolution 351?
Resolution 351, House of Assembly Rules.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the
I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the resolution carry.
I recognize, or you two can take it outside. Okay. I recognize the Honourable Government, not the Honourable Government House here, I recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I didn't think I'd be up again tonight, but here I am. I believe when I was up, whenever it was last, not that long ago, I was talking about, and I didn't put it this way then, but I'll put it this way now, the punitive nature of this government. The degree to which this government doesn't like to be criticized, doesn't like to hear tough feedback, doesn't really like the democratic process, dare I say, and here we are. This is a motion that fundamentally impacts the rules of the House and the democratic process of the House. And yet again, like, I entreat the members. Think about this. Ministerial responsibility is the... Oh, is this a different one? Okay, this one's not quite as bad. But... But listen, okay, so my comments on this one will be shorter. I didn't know it was coming. I didn't have time. That's the way the business of the House works. This is a teachable moment, folks. I did not know this motion was coming because we don't have a legislative calendar. We don't have a plan of when we sit or what's coming. Your colleagues in Ottawa know when a bill is going to be debated 3 weeks in advance.
Stay on the
And
bill.
they plan when they're going to be there. We don't have that luxury, so sometimes we're flying by the seat of our pants.
Stay on the motion, please.
This is a motion that impacts the goings-on of this House, and that is exactly what I am speaking to, Madam Speaker. This motion seems pretty innocuous. It's been introduced that way. It just changes the notice for private and local bills. And what it says essentially is that the local bills committee may alter or waive the requirement of publication of notice of a bill. So right now, we've got some private and local bills before the House now. I'm guessing that hockey one might be more controversial than the member thought, judging on what I've heard from my, judging from what I've heard from some of my constituents, but we'll save that for another day. However, I do want to make a really important point, and I really hope that the members will listen to this and that the House Leader will listen to this. The reason that we publish and give notice of private and local bills is because they all seem like they're not that big of a deal. Like, by definition, these bills are housekeeping. We're amalgamating a society, or we're designating a rank, or, you know, they're all things, they are by definition housekeeping, unless they're not. And what I want to say here is we don't always know if they're not. So right now, we have a private and local bill, and I won't keep people too long. This is really important, folks. Please think about this. At least adjourn this and think about it when I'm finished speaking. I'm really asking you to do this. So right now, we have a private and local bill that my colleague introduced, amalgamating the United Churches. The United Churches seems great. Churches' attendance is down. They want to bring their assets together. This has been happening throughout our province, throughout our country, for the last couple of decades. When I was first elected, there was almost mirror legislation that came through this House as a private and local bill. And it was legislation to amalgamate the Archdiocese of the Halifax-Yarmouth Catholic Church. And the member who's no longer in the House brought it, the government member, and it was slated for to go to private and local bills. We didn't think much of it, but because notice was published, a class action lawyer who was representing victims of abuse of the Catholic Church saw the notice, came to private and local bills, and told the government members something that they didn't know, which was that the amalgamation of these churches could lead to the denial of compensation for victims. Not that it would, but that it could, that the change of that financial structure could have a material impact on the lives of people who had suffered abuse. That's the only time I've seen something like that happen in the House in 10 years, and in the end, and I don't know what happened subsequently, but at the time, that bill didn't go through for that reason, because the government paused and said, well, this is a serious question, we should think about this. That's why we advertise. So I know that this just gives discretion to waive that advertising, but the people giving discretion are the members of the committee, and I guess what I'm trying to say here is that I don't think the members of the committee are going to be the ones who know if it impacts people or not. So you've got a plan, you know, but I really want you to hear me. Please think about this. It might only happen once in 10 years, and once in 10 years is too much. There's no problem with private and local bills as it happens now. Most members have seen this. They come to the floor, they go to private and local bills, 90% of the time no one shows up. They come back, tick, 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 tick. They don't take up time. We don't spend a lot of time talking to them. Nobody filibusters a private and local bill, I'll tell you that much. But they can, in sneaky ways we don't know about, have an impact. So for that reason, we don't support this motion, and I'd ask the government members to just take it back and think about it.
I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Peer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Often when I'm going to talk about a motion, I actually do like to read it to kind of give some grounding. So bear with me here. The motion for the be it resolved says, be it resolved that Rule 69 of the Rules and Forms of Procedure of the House of Assembly is amended by adding 1 immediately after rule numbers and adding the following paragraph. 2, at the request of the promoter of a private local bill and private local bills committee may alter or waive the requirements of paragraph 1 respecting the publication of notice respecting the bill, subject to any conditions the committee has prescribed. Sorry, Madam Speaker, my phone went off silent. Madam Speaker, I read this, and I read it a few times because I wanted to make sure I understood it was saying what I thought it was saying at first. So, Madam Speaker, I brought it to a few people. I asked them to read this. And I was basically told I was correct in my assumption that this would not provide more notice, but it would provide, it could provide less in the end. And a few moments ago, my colleague talked about it was the Halifax-Yarmouth Act. And actually, Speaker, one of my former professors actually discussed this, wrote an article about this bill in the Chronicle Herald. And I think for the members to really understand what I'm talking about, I kind of want to read a little bit of this article, and I will table it. So this was November 10th, 2017, and the author is Professor Tom Urbaniak. Last month, Bill 30 was introduced to the Nova Scotia House of Assembly. It was unanimously given a second reading by MLAs after less than a minute of debate. It goes to what my colleague said. We don't often debate private local members' bills for a lengthy amount of time. The new Archdiocese of Halifax-Yarmouth Act is still before the Standing Committee of Local and Private Bills, where it was rightly deferred for more consideration. The implications are anything but local or private. The proposed law would grant the Roman Catholic Archbishop Anthony Mancini regulatory powers that are currently held only by officials of the government. He would become, in effect, his own registrar of joint stocks companies with the unilateral power to create, dissolve, modify, and completely control dozens of civil corporations. This was supposed to be a simple private member's bill. Meanwhile, what the bill was actually going to do was give an archbishop unilateral power over dozens of civil corporations. The new act would allow him to use provincial law, not just church law, to require parishes to work collaboratively with him on all matters. Madam Speaker, without the publication of this bill in newspapers, nobody would have known about this. Nobody would have known how much power the Archbishop was going to have. And there's another story on this, and it was a proposed act for Cape Breton Cemetery. in April 10th, 2023, last Wednesday, a statutory advertisement appeared in the Cape Breton Post. It stated, the Nova Scotia House of Assembly is considering Bill 274, the Catholic Cemetery Act. The bill was introduced by MLA Brian Comer on the recommendations of the board in the Catholic Cemetery Company, which was legal name for the Resurrection Cemetery. I'm sorry, I
Order.
said, I understand what I said, Madam Speaker. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
I retract that statement.
Thank you.
And it would be, sorry.
Yeah.
It'd be the Minister of, the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction Services
Correct.
and the MLA for Cape Breton East.
Yes.
Thank you. So along with that bill, Madam Speaker, an advertisement appeared. And Professor Baniak read the bill, and he had concerns, and he called the Office of the Legislative Council to advise that he would be making written submissions. And on Easter Sunday, he completed a 5-page brief on the Assembly Standing Committee on Local and Private Bills to explain the flaws potentially in this piece of legislation. So you see, Madam Speaker, when we advertise all bills, we can find flaws in those bills. Flaws that we may not have seen before because we just thought it was an innocuous bill, turns out has huge implications. And so I'm going to table these, and I hope my colleagues read them in full to understand the full extent of not providing advertising in all its forms and why it is such a concern to limit that advertisement. And with that, Madam Speaker, I take my seat. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to echo comments of my colleagues that have already spoke. I think in general, we shouldn't be doing anything to shorten the legislative process so that there is time to do our due diligence and take a second look at any piece of legislation that's going through this House. And if there is a desire by anyone to rush it through, it's always important to ask what are the motivations behind that, and therefore I do not support this resolution.
Is the House ready for the question? The motion is for Resolution 359. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay? Nay. The motion is carried. 351, correct. I recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, can I have a 5-minute recess?
Yeah, let's just sit here and quiet for a couple minutes.
Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank everybody for the great debate tonight. Could you please call bills for second reading?
Bills for second reading.
Madam Speaker, would you please call Bill number 200, the Cannabis Control Act?
Bill number 200, the Cannabis Control Act. I recognize the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in my place today, Speaker, to move that Bill 200, amendments to the Cannabis Control Act, be now read a second time. It has been some time since cannabis became legal in Canada. When the federal government legalized cannabis in 2018, it had 3 clear goals: keep cannabis out of the hands of youth, keep profits out of the hands of criminals, protect public health and safety by allowing adults to access legal cannabis with strict regulations. And we share those goals as well, and they haven't changed since 2018. The amendments to the Cannabis Control Act are aligned with these goals and will strengthen public health and safety for youth and adults. Having a parallel black market in cannabis doesn't accomplish these goals. The illegal dispensaries are offering a false sense of security. They are a threat to consumers, youth, and the integrity of the regulated system. The illegal market is not subject to the safeguards on which the regulated system is built. It can amplify risks through uncontrolled potency, product uncertainty, and ease of access to youth. The packaging in the illegal market is eye-catching and attractive to youth, while the regulated product is plain. As a school principal, I've seen the negative effects of cannabis on youth. Our brains continue to develop until we are in our early to mid-20s, and I've seen anxiety, depression, and other issues in youth, and we need to protect them. And that's why we are strengthening the Cannabis Control Act through expanded enforcement authority, increased fines, and clarified evidentiary standards. I'll highlight some of the changes to the Cannabis Control Act. Adding a new offense when landlords permit a place or premises to be used for distribution or sale of cannabis in violation of the Act. Expanding enforcement by allowing the appointment of peace officers to enforce the Act in addition to police. Increasing fine amounts and setting mandatory minimum fines. Amendments that will clarify that courts can infer a product is cannabis based on a common sense observation such as appearance and odor. Currently, courts can infer substance as cannabis is based on packaging, labeling, or signage. Permitting the court to accept a certificate from the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation as proof that a person charged under the Act did not procure the product at the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation. These amendments are simple, common sense changes. The proposed amendments will strengthen Nova Scotia's regulated cannabis system while strengthening compliance and enforcement provisions. I'd now like to talk a bit about the reasons why this is such a threat to youth. There is growing evidence in the medical system about the dangers youth faced when they ingest cannabis, and adults as well, but primarily youth. I'm going to read some now from some medical studies, and I will table all these medical studies, Madam Speaker. Large health studies have found that there is real and clinically relevant links between adolescent use of cannabis and depression, anxiety, and bipolar spectrum diseases. Higher potency THC is linked to cannabis use disorder, which can worsen anxiety, mood symptoms, sleep, and functioning. A major European study recently established that substantially higher odds of first episode psychotics among people who use high potency cannabis daily compared with those who have never used cannabis. There are multiple public health agencies that summarize similar evidence. Risks increase with earlier ingestion of cannabis, higher frequency, and higher potency ingestion of cannabis. Large cohort work and meta-analysis report that adolescent cannabis use is associated with late depressive and anxiety disorders. Recently, the CBC has been doing a lot of reporting on use of cannabis by young people. They report that psychosis rates climb among youth people throughout Ontario. People aged 14 to 20 are more often being diagnosed with psychotic disorders, including schizophrenia, compared to cohorts which came around earlier. Those diagnosed were more likely to be male, live in low-income neighborhoods, and have received previous treatment for substance abuse. And the CBC also reports that cannabis use among seniors is also up, and so are emergency room visits due to ingesting the cannabis. So that is just some of the medical reports that have come very recently. Some of these are large studies. We have seen a growing number of illegal dispensaries across Nova Scotia. These are a danger to public safety, and that is one of the reasons we're trying to give our police services more tools to try to combat an illegal black market, which runs parallel to the regulated market. And I'll end my comments there and open the floor up to others. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the, he's tabling them right now. I recognize the documents are tabled. I recognize, who do I recognize? I recognize the Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank everybody for the great debate tonight. I move to adjourn debate on Bill number 200.
The motion is to adjourn debate on Bill number 200.
Okay, thank you.
Order, order, order. It's adjourning. It's not stopping debate, okay? All right. Order. The motion is to adjourn debate on Bill 200. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This concludes government business for today. I move that the House do now rise to meet again February 26th from 9 a.m. to 11:59 p.m. Following daily routine and question period, government business will include a second reading of Bill number 198, Bill number 200, Bill 201, and government notice of motion resolutions.
The motion is that the House rise to meet again on Friday, February 26th, from the hours of 9 a.m. to 11:59 a.m. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye?
Aye.
Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. PM. It was my turn tonight. PM.